Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Bernt-Santy and super excited to have Miriam Beloglovsky here. I mispronounced your first name instead of your more difficult name. Anyway, the Polish girl in me is always going to get your last name right. But Miriam Beloglovsky is here. Hi, Miriam.
Hi, how are you? Except Beloglovsky's Russian, but
Well,
we're
oh yeah.
very close.
Yeah, yeah. I just mean maybe I'm used to those kinds of names that are maybe harder.
Right. Yeah, I always say that if it ends on a Y, it's Russian. If it ends in an
It's
I, it's
Polish.
Polish. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, that's the origin of that name.
yeah, yeah. Um,
So go ahead.
yeah, I was like, well, the Polish in me honors the Russian in you, and we'll just go from there. Miriam, you've got well, first tell folks what you want them to know about you, and then I'm going to jump in with this book that we're going to talk about.
I'm Miriam Beloglovsky. What do I want you to know about me? I'm a co-author of the Loose Parts books, amongst other books that I have written. And my focus right now is really looking at creating inclusive ecosystems for young children so that they can thrive and come in with this idea that they don't have a disability, they have a diagnosis. We can either disable them or helping them and support them so that they can thrive in spaces.
Mhm.
So that's my new goal, and writing other books, as you know,
Yeah,
and speaking and presenting.
love it. Yeah. So we're talking about this book, Just Play, Inspiring Adult Play in Early Childhood Education. Looks like that if you're watching the video. And it's from Red Leaf Press. Excuse me. And this one is, I don't think I realized this when I first saw it come out, that it's focused on working with adults and not necessarily, you talk a lot about the work with children, but your focus here in this one is really, as adults, we need to be more playful
Yep.
and really uh, focus on that for ourselves so that we can do what children need from us. So I'm going to start with a quote from page 10, just to kind of get us started. And then, as you know, listeners know, the conversations just go wherever they go from there. So you wrote, as a profession, we must regain our identity and focus on what we know brings joy to children, families, and communities. We must recognize that every interaction with young children is powerful and filled with teaching and learning exchanges. It's time to regenerate our profession and end the identity crisis collectively. We do not need to define education as the process of memorizing the word of the week or reciting components of the calendar. Instead, we must reclaim the privilege of giving children a love for nature, loose parts, clay, art, construction, sand, water, and mud. Let's find the joy of moving, singing, rhyming, and engaging in imaginative play. Let's create fantasy worlds that stretch our creativity. Let's connect and build meaningful friendships and relationships. And I'll end with this sentence. We must invent a new language that describes the pedagogies of play and care, and that starts to redefine what teaching and learning are about so that we can protect, honor, and respect the culture of childhood.
I
What's
wrote all that.
You did. It's so
All
good. You're
that.
so smart. But that's longer than we usually have to start. But I just love this idea of and it's come up in a lot of my conversations lately, like finding a word other than teacher to use. And I've been in some conversations that are talking about how we have to leave care out of it. We have to just talk about early education to get people on board, and all of that contributes to taking the focus away from play and joy and relationships, I think. So I wanted to read as much of it as I could fit in from that one section.
I think it all happens. And I think that's one of the places that I would encourage us as a profession to really engage in deeper conversations about. We somehow have gotten to this place where play is now being redefined as something that it's not truly what I see play to be or what the research shows us play to be.
Yeah.
We have a tendency of creating language like play based,
Yes.
which doesn't imply more than just taking play and using it as an activity
Hmm.
to teach a concept. And I think that's where maybe that pivoting point that sort of intersects, where we stop defining really the meaning of play and where the word teaching comes in. I think teaching is embedded in the observations that we do with young children and the opportunities we find within the play, but how much are we taking away from them when we call it play-based? And should we even be calling it something more than just play? For me, play is play.
Right.
It's been defined. It's been researched.
Right.
So why do we keep as a profession going back to that whole role of what play is and what play means? And
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to bring in when I talk about that. Care is part of play. I mean, it's part of the interactions that exist with children and adults,
Mhm.
even with infants, and you're holding them and describing and talking with them. That becomes a playful interaction. And I think it's also important to redefine what play and playfulness is, because I'm seeing a whole emergence of conversations around playfulness
Yeah.
as
So
well.
what, let's define those two things. What is your working definition of play?
For me, play is self-initiated,
Hmm.
self-controlled. The child is in charge. What's important is the action that comes from the play that the children are generating, be it in interaction with adults, interaction with peers, or interaction with objects. I think we have forgotten to look at the action and the meaning of that action. And that's how play comes. Playfulness, it is something that is inside of you, that you find as you embrace the joy that you create for yourself or you create in the environment. So I think both coexist,
Yeah.
but they're different.
Yeah. And I think definitely you're talking about this in the book, but there came a point for me where I had to realize that not everybody had the playful childhood that I had, that not everybody had that
Mhm.
um, those memories to kind of fall back on. And so it was harder for them to think about providing that kind of real, true play. Um, and our our egos get tied up in it. If I'm a teacher, then I have to be teaching, and my vision of teaching comes from, elementary school or when I played teacher when I was younger. And it's hard for adults to let go or to set up those environments if it's something they've not had themselves,
Mhm.
however you want to do that. So can you talk a little bit about
I think,
adults being playful or how that all fits?
yeah, for me, I think it's learning to trust who
Mhm.
you are. And I think I see a lot of new teachers not trusting their ability to be with children. I mean, I have memories of the first time working with a group of children and having to sing in front of them. I'm tone deaf. I cannot keep
Yeah.
a tune at all. And that sort of just crept in me, and I couldn't even start a song.
Hmm.
So I turned to the children and I said, "What do you want to sing?" And I gave them full control of what they wanted to sing. I said, "Okay, you started." And that sort of covered my
Uh-huh.
lack of trust or uncomfortableness,
Yeah.
but it opened up for this joyful interaction. And I think that's usually what happens. We don't trust ourselves. Either we've seen ourselves as non-creative, or because messages we've gotten in our childhood,
Mhm.
or we've seen ourselves as not having had that joyful childhood that you describe. Some people have not.
Right.
But at the end of the day, play is in every one of us. We just have to find it again. We
Hmm.
just have to create those places where adults can thrive as they play.
Hmm.
Um, I know that we often do this activity with adults, say, "What are your play memories?" And that can also be very painful.
Right. Yeah, I've stopped
Yeah.
doing that. I used to do that, and then I realized that for some it felt like competition with each other for the play memories they had to share, but then also there were some that it was really painful and difficult to go back and revisit.
Exactly,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, whatever experience they've had. But there's ways to re-encounter that playfulness within an adult.
Hmm.
And I think in the book I talk about, oh my God, I'm going to space out names. I talk about the idea, not the inner child, because that's more of a psychological term, but the inner characteristics or your childhood characteristics that we must reclaim, like this idea of being creative. How do we go back to finding that creativity that is within every one of us? And I think also creativity has sort of been hindered by, well, I'm not creative because I don't know how to draw, or I'm
Right.
not creative because I don't know how to do art. When creativity is just looking at something in a very different angle, from a very different perspective, and be able to come up with a different concept. So creativity needs to be redefined. And also creativity can be learned. It is not something that we have to always think, I'm naturally creative.
Yeah.
And along with that, let's be messy. Creativity will not exist until you give yourself permission to be messy.
Yeah. Yeah. Whether that's actual physical mess or just that risk of looking, like you talk about when you're singing, feeling silly. Um, I I've been, and I'm just sharing this because I don't know where I'm eventually going to land or what I'm deciding about it. But I used to, when I was leading, like facilitating a group training, or now as a professor, I wanted everyone to feel, very emotionally safe. And so if they didn't want to participate, they didn't want to speak out. I wasn't too worried about it, but um, it's hard to keep group conversations going and to have that facilitative learning and not just me lecturing if they're not sharing. So I've decided that, and I talk to them a lot in the beginning weeks of class, that if you're going to be working in early childhood, you're going to be speaking and singing um, and playing in ways that might feel silly, and other adults will be around you, and it's part of the job. So I'm gonna, have more of a requirement to speak out and participate and take part in these play plans I have in class. And I haven't decided if I feel like that's successful or not yet, but just to sort of describe my evolution of thinking about this, I think we do need to take risks and get messy, whether it's emotionally messy or actually physically messy.
Yeah, I
What do you
think it's
think about
giving
that?
permission. I mean, I'm now retired, so I haven't been teaching for a while,
Yeah,
not that long. I mean, I retired in 2020, December 2022,
yeah,
but I used to teach the creative projects and experiences class.
yeah,
And I always started with just talking about what is creativity and how do you define creativity for yourselves.
yeah,
My goal was always to help individual students to find their creativity in whatever form it was. And it was not easy. So I would prepare explorations for them to just paint with their feet, paint with their hands.
yeah.
Some will do it, some will not,
Hmm.
depending on the comfort level. So you have to sort of build in that permission to say, no.
Hmm.
One of the things I talk about in the book that I think would be a wonderful thing to do is improv.
Yeah, I had a couple
Learning
things
from
marked in that
improv.
section.
Um, because it goes back to my experience in not being able to sing. How do you improvise, and I think early childhood, a lot of the times, because if you're following the children's lead, you really are improvising in the moment. You have to be very limber in the
Yeah,
way that you answer, and you offer new opportunities for the children. So how do we build that flexibility of
yeah.
responding? And I think improvisation is a wonderful way to do that. Um,
I was looking for the quote because there was a quote in your chapter or your section about doing that, because that terrified me. The section I read about improv as a practice, a way to practice this. Um, gosh, I can't find it, but Can you talk about what you mean, like in actual practice? What do you mean when you say improv is a good way?
I mean, I'm not going to take you into the full improv of
Yeah,
theater.
yeah. Don't make me improv, but talk
No.
about it.
But you can do simple things like starting to tell the story, and then the next person builds upon that story, and the next person builds upon that story. And you compare it to children's dramatic play, it is very similar.
Oh yeah.
So how do we can begin as adults to make those connections so that you begin to value the collective storytelling
Mm-hmm.
that comes when you're improvising as
Yeah.
you're building this whole script that you can reenact and replay.
Uh-huh.
You know, I think, and I can't remember the chapters. Unfortunately, I don't retain a lot of what I write. I have to constantly go back and reread it. But there's a chapter where I talk about even doing a game of Clue, you know, where you are finding mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be done. I think it's in the space where I talk about designing spaces
Mm-hmm.
for playfulness to emerge. And I think that's the other part that's important is that this is not a professional development one day thing. This is a culture that has to be established in a program. When you really value the concept of play, then you provide the opportunities for the adults to also play.
Mm-hmm.
How do you design the way that people enter into your center or your program? What are the messages that says you can sit here and play
Mm-hmm.
for both adults and for children? How do you send the message to families? This is a place where we can play.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have opportunities for them as they're walking in to engage in mini play, if you want to call it something else, for them to really engage with children? And then I talk a lot about how to design the staff lounge or the workroom. I mean, most places call it workroom because
Yeah.
we can get past
Yeah.
this idea
We
that
can't just lounge.
it can be lounging, you know, and I think a lot of accreditation programs required it to be a workspace before you get the funding.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we create a playful space for that? And not this is not the place where teachers come in to continue to work or to do the paperwork that the program requires, but it is a place where you can just play, stay back. So what do you do on the walls? What games can you bring in? What loose parts can you curate and put in this place so that adults have that opportunity to just
Mm-hmm.
quiet down and play. And I think that all connects. And also with improv, you know, improvisation doesn't necessarily need to be a physical activity all the time.
Yeah.
It can happen in ongoing collaborative puzzle building or ongoing collaborative idea building,
Yeah.
you know, hive minding in groups.
Mm-hmm. So do you have favorite things? I mean, loose parts, of course, but like specific ideas for things that work well in staff spaces.
I actually love to go back in history.
Oh.
So I put together a basket, and there's a photo in the book actually of games that I used to play when I was a child
Uh-huh.
that are still around and that also have a connectivity to different cultures. So pick up sticks
Uh-huh.
was one of them. Jacks. I mean, I used to play jacks, and I talked to a lot of people that they didn't have the money to play with jacks. They used stones,
Mm-hmm.
but the game was the same.
Uh-huh.
Jump ropes, you know, things that really reconnect us to that place of just being you as you were growing up.
Yeah.
I love the idea of creating spaces where we can go in and build our creativity. I think in the book I talk about creating studios,
Mm-hmm.
adult studios. So I have one with clay,
Yeah.
um, you know, where we can just get in there and get messy,
Yeah.
get really dirty.
Yeah.
It is a dream, but I hope that people can start thinking about how do we build these playful, joyful spaces where the more joyful the adult is, the more joyful the children will
For
be.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I've had things like easels and paint and Play-Doh and clay and blocks and things in staff rooms. Um, this will tell you how long ago it was. Calvin and Hobbes books of funny, funny comics and just things to make them maybe laugh in the middle of the day or something. And it does really, some people are like, well, this is unnecessary. I just want to eat my sandwich and get back. Or But to watch it sort of evolve into a space that they really do play in has
I
been
mean, that's what
amazing.
I would hope, if you have a whiteboard, you start with a knock joke and let's see who brings in the next thing. So now you're improvising on building on that joke.
Uh-huh.
Whatever, knowing the educators in your program, what are they interested in? What do they really like to do?
Yeah.
Can also bring in the ideas of where you can get started. I
Mhm.
mean, I have, let me get him to show you real quick. Um, this is
Right.
these
What
are
is
one
it?
of my favorite. It's Jenga blocks, but they're acrylic.
Uh-huh.
So sometimes having something like that it's new,
Yeah.
space combined with the wooden Jenga,
Uh-huh.
and see what begins to emerge and what begins to develop. So
Yeah.
adding that mystery. So when they walk in, there's something new that challenged their thinking. It's sort of the same way we work with young children,
Yeah.
where we add complexity to the play.
Yeah.
So I look a lot as to how do I add complexity to the engagement that adults have
Yeah.
as they're exploring with different materials.
Yeah. So this kind of leads, one of the things that surprised me in the book that I hadn't thought about before was you talk about planning our conferences with play in mind, not just having a workshop about play, but
Yep.
playing while planning the conference. So
Yep.
I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that a little bit because I think that's something that I don't hear anybody else talking about.
I don't know about you. We just saw each other at
Yeah.
NACI,
Yeah.
and to me, they're boring. Most conferences are, for me, is places to connect with people.
Right.
I'll be honest, I don't go to a lot of the workshops. I don't go to a lot of
Yeah.
things because been there, done that. After you've done 10 of them, or you do 4, 5 of the,
Yeah.
however amount you do
Yeah.
a year,
Yeah.
they all seem to
Depending on
be
what stage of teacher development you're in.
right. I
Yeah.
mean, for new teachers, I'm sure they're wonderful, or for people that are just starting to present, I think it's
Yeah.
wonderful. So nothing wrong with conferences, but I envision these plays that if you come from a playful space and you start planning from the perspective of play by engaging people that are organizing these conferences in a playful way and having opportunities to play, then more creativity emerges in the way that you do things.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to be the speaker of record, I mean, the author or the professor of record for the Reform Judaism Conference in 2022. And we spent a year playing as we planned this
Yeah.
conference. And it was lovely. I mean, we had an entire room completed with loose parts where after workshops, people could come and play.
Hmm.
We had one night where it was loose parts, light, and shadow play.
Uh-huh.
Bring your drink, come and play. So there were opportunities for playing throughout. We had
Yeah.
singing in the morning to start the day. We had meditation going on with this wonderful woman, Shira Klein, and Susanna Anderson, and they would play the guitar and the fiddle, and it was just inviting. The whole entire conference was playful.
Hmm.
The presentations, most of them were playful. And for me, it filled me spiritually to a
Yeah.
very high level. And I think most of the people that came in, most of them were Jewish educators, not all of them, but they walked out of there, I think, feeling renewed
Hmm.
and feeling like this is doable.
Right.
So, how do we change our conferences to do that? I mean, imagine walking in a conference area and you have magicians doing a mini
Yeah.
presentation somewhere. I don't know if you've ever been to the Magic Castle in LA.
No.
Oh my gosh, it's the most magical place. But magicians stroll, and you have famous magicians and new magicians, and they're doing card tricks. Or you have a moment where you have a place where people can come and paint together
Hmm.
or do ephemeral art together using loose parts. How do you, how would that change the way we view things. I mean, if we really want to start bringing in play to a higher standard with all of these education academic demands and requirements, we need to bring it to a different level. We need to just start playing ourselves as adults.
Well, I have a dream of that early childhood nerd conference someday. So we'll do a
Oh,
playful planned conference when I
I'm with
do
you.
that.
I'm totally with you. Yeah.
So you mentioned standards, and that's sort of always looming in any conversation about play, whether it's wanting our teachers to feel playful and to experience play or providing it for children. It's a tremendous pressure for teachers, and I can see some of them saying, well, I can't be silly and playful because I have to, what if my director walks in and I'm just being silly? So what do you say
What do
to
we
that?
do?
What do you tell them?
I
What do
think we
do?
need to learn to make play, the learning that happens in play, more visible.
Yeah.
I don't think we're good enough at doing that. Unfortunately, again, as a profession, we sort of polarized.
Mm-hmm.
We have no play, only play, only play, only play. And then we have academics, academics, academics.
Yeah.
And we need to come together.
Yeah.
We need to talk about this is where the play shows the learning and connect it to the standards. We may not like them. I don't like them. I don't like to that be the focus.
But
But
you can
unless
make those connections
you have
authentically. Yeah.
we have to make those connections. We have to get loud at making those connections. We can't just say children need to play for the sake of play.
Mm-hmm.
That's the ideal world,
Right.
but it's not the reality that we're living today.
Right. That's
And
not the piece that's going to change anybody's mind.
no,
Yeah.
you won't. And it's unfortunate, but that is the reality.
Yeah.
Politically, historically, that's where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing some reading in I've done a deep dive into the loose parts theory because we keep quoting Simon Nicholson. Well, he wrote a 4-page article
Yeah. In what, 70?
in the 1970s.
Yeah.
He did coin the term.
Yeah.
But where is the depth of the research? And there is so much that we're not talking about.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work that has existed for many, many generations. And if we don't use the language in a way that demonstrates that this is important, we need to stop fighting the reality that we're losing the battle.
Right.
The train left the station a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
So our role, as I see it, for those of us that have an audience that have a voice, is to continue to talk about play is wonderful. However, there's also a high responsibility that we have to begin to make connections to how those standards are met. Because the children that are losing the battle are the children in underfunded communities.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is a big concern because people that have the money, they're going to continue to play. They have that privilege.
Right.
But in underfunded communities, children may not have those opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the responsibility to make those connections. And I think by bringing in more adult play into the spaces, we have a better way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So hold on, give me a minute. Give me a minute. That reminds me of something, if I can find it. You talk about critical thinking, and I think this is a good place to stick this into the conversation, because to be able to kind of fight that fight for play, we have to be able to think beyond that binary. If it's either play or it's learning, or we have to be able to think, well, people around me only care about standards. So how do I make these fit? And I think critical thinking is a key piece of that. But it's well, let me just read this quote from page 31. You said critical thinking requires an agile and flexible mind. Successful people are critical and creative thinkers who can adapt different strategies to life circumstances and respond appropriately to make the most of the changes, decisions, and unexpected moments at the heart of life. How does play fit in as adults for my critical thinking? How does Where does that?
I think play is flexibility.
Mhm.
Play teaches you to pivot. Play gives
Such
you
a good way to
that.
say it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pivoting point. It's I cannot tell you, and Suzanne Axelson talks a lot about this idea of, I think it's her term, mind flex instead of mindset.
Uh-huh.
We think, oh, we have to have a mindset for loose parts, a loose parts mindset. I want to loose parts mind flex.
Right. Set's right there in the word. We don't want to be set. We
We
want to
don't want to be
be flexible.
set.
Yeah, that's good.
We want to build this capacity to pivot. We all have challenges. Children have challenges. One of the things that the biggest concerns that I'm seeing emerging a lot in the people that I work with is this idea that I can't do it any other way because the curriculum mandates me to do
Right.
this that way. I think a lot of the times, and I'm coming to this conclusion that it is when they bring in what we call the urban myth, licensing doesn't let me, or curriculum
Mhm.
doesn't let me,
Yeah.
is more out of the fear to not be able to do something different
Uh-huh.
and not wanting to go there. I think that's where our insecurities as adults kick in. So if we can switch that way of thinking to say, yes, you can. And this is how we do it.
Mhm.
As you play, what do you notice is happening?
Mhm.
And it takes time. But I'm also very hopeful that the more we do play with adults, the more that they begin to value it
Yeah.
in a different place.
Yeah. So my struggle with of course my main lens right now is my students in my classes. So much of it is, switching to online or fully online asynchronous, or we've got virtual where we're all in Zoom instead of in a classroom together. And that's, I think, another area where I have to be a very flexible thinker, a very critical thinker, kind of curious, or I'm going to turn those modalities into lectures, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
do you have thoughts about how we do playfulness with adults if we're doing an online webinar or something like that?
I start with play with each other. I mean, you have your writing group where
Yeah.
everybody's sitting and watching each other write. How about starting a play group where you start everything play? I think one of the biggest things we have to be careful with is that when we design these opportunities online for students, is that we don't go back to or divert back to games,
Mhm.
because then it's gamification for learning instead of playing for
Yeah.
learning. And that's an easy thing. I mean, I see all these new things like, oh, let's design a Padlet bingo, or let's design the Padlet something. I think that's even starting your webinar with an improv,
Mm.
with some of the activities or
Right.
explorations that I talk about in the book could make it a lot more engaging.
And
You
just
know,
loosen people up for the discussion and the stuff. But modeling that mindset is really fun. And this is I haven't mentioned this so far, but all of your throughout the book, you've got like concrete, here's what you could do. Here's something to try for this idea. Here's a way you could try it. Here's what I've done. And I really appreciate that it's the kind of the more general stuff for me to think about, and then the really specific ways that it could be tried. I think that's valuable.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a lot of thinking and work and went back into all of my years of experience to sort of pull some of those
Yeah.
moments. I think I talk about one of the moments where I was sitting on the um what started really bringing this idea of playfulness to my brain and play for professional development. I was sitting at a meeting with these high functioning people, the dean of Pacific Oaks College at the time,
Yeah.
and a friend of mine who's now the president of the largest resource and referral in LA. And it was so funny because at one point they went at each other and they started wrestling in the middle of the meeting. I mean, I don't even know if they remember, but it was so fun to watch. And here we are, this group of, it was not a big group, it was a small group. We were just like so taken aback by the freedom that
Uh-huh.
the space created for that type of wonderful moment to emerge, you know. So then we started dancing, and there was one of our colleagues who did flamenco dancing. I did flamenco dancing. So we just sort of evolved into creating the time to do that.
Yeah.
Always incorporated an art exploration in the meetings, you know, start with something that just gets your hands to paint or collaging or whatever it is that gets your brain to keep going. Those are not that difficult to do.
Right.
You, um, when I did the adult play workshop for the play conference, I think you were there,
Yeah. In
but
San
I think we
Antonio.
were presenting at the
Yeah.
same
Yeah, I
time that
couldn't come to
I
you.
was so bad.
Yeah.
I did, I brought in rhythm sticks.
Uh-huh.
Remember those, which have
Yeah.
disappeared now?
Yep.
And I did it
Because
to,
people could hit each other. Children will hit each other with
I
them.
know, or they're too loud.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. You brought in
So I
rhythm.
did it to We Will Rock You. And I mean, nobody made any sense. I actually did it for this other conference, that Reform Judaism
We heard you in my room.
heard us.
We shared a wall. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. But it brought so much joy to the presenters to do that. You know, so presentations, professional development needs to be to that level
Mhm.
where you just bring in laughter. I
Mhm.
mean, honestly, most of what people present, I can read it afterwards. Give me your I don't give out my PowerPoints, maybe I
Right.
should.
Yeah.
But you know, it's like you can, if you have to talk so much, we're missing the point. We're losing the play. And I think that's what's happened
Yeah. Well, and
in
so Richard Cohen and I have talked a lot in the past about, because he also teaches college students, how we want to teach, we want to model when we're teaching our adults how we hope they go out and teach with
the
children.
children, yeah.
And so when I'm in the front of the room doing all the lecturing, I'm sending a really weird message when I then say play needs to be active and it needs to be relevant and meaningful, and they need to be able to act on their ideas. So that's what this book I think is really, really helpful, really great.
I think bringing it back, you know, I always had invitations to play. Every table had a different invitation. And I would start class with a play invitation and play music. And then I would see what emerged from there. And that's how I had we do have a syllabus, and
Yeah.
I was got in trouble because I didn't follow the syllabus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, or the schedule within the syllabus, because I did more of the emergent, just like we do emergent curriculum with young children. I think we need to do emergent curriculum with adults.
Yep.
It just needs to be a little bit more, I don't want to call it controlled, but set more boundaries so it doesn't become a gripe session.
Yes. Yeah,
But
that's when it gets tricky to bring it back from, for sure.
right. But if you set up the conditions for play, then the provocations can emerge from that. And then you can make those connections.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we're getting close to an hour. If people
Oh,
want
it's
to find
not
out,
bad.
if people want to find out more about you, where do they go, Miriam? Where can they find
Um,
you?
they can find me at playfultransformation.com.
Mhm.
There's my contact info. There's my website. I am constantly blogging. I'm about to put up 3 different blogs on aesthetics,
Wow.
because that is another thing. You know, and you use the word curiosity. I've been thinking a lot about curiosity
Mhm.
and its connections to how do we become curious about each other in a very authentic way,
Mhm.
and how can that curiosity lead to deeper conversations.
Yeah.
So my brain is always working, so you'll see it on my blogs.
Yeah. I know I'm writing down a note because my brain is also going in a different direction now based on
Oh,
that. Yeah. And so again, the book is called Just Play: Inspiring Adult Play in Early Childhood Education. Um, Thank you for the book and for the conversation. And
you're welcome. I hope a lot of administrators use what's in there to really
yeah,
change what
I
they're
hope so
doing
too.
in their programs.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I'm going to say it again. It's really accessible. It's really, um, uh, there's depth to the idea, and then there's concrete suggestions for how to take your
And,
first step towards that, or
and
to,
it's also very personal. I think it's the first book that I ever shared a lot of me
uh-huh. Yeah.
in that open way that I did in this
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed it. So thank you, Miriam.
You're welcome.
And thank you everybody for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.